With only 3 points separating Sheffield Wednesday in 23rd with Plymouth in 17th, the Championship relegation battle is set to go right down to the wire this season. That's why we're going to be checking in on the latest Bookies odds for today's video, specifically looking into who their candidates are for the drop right now. Now, I think we've already established that it's probably going to take upwards of 50 points to survive this season, so that threshold is going to be particularly high this year. With 9 games to go, there's still plenty of points to play for, but teams in and around the bottom of the table are going to find that they're going to start running out of games soon. Let me know in the comments down below who are your personal picks for the bottom 3, and without any further ado, let's jump in. We'll start this video out in 13th, go through some of the outsiders maybe that could still get dragged into this relegation battle before then really delving into the teams that are banging trouble right now. Based on the Bookies' end of season predictions, they'd have Bristol City finishing in 13th, and with relegation odds of 250 to 1, it would take a huge collapse from Liam Manning's men to be relegated at this stage. Now, it was a big win for the Robins over the weekend and a much needed victory against Swansea at that as well. Going into that game, they had lost 4 consecutive matches, but the result against Swansea puts them onto 47 points now. That only leaves them needing probably a couple more wins in their last 9 fixtures to go ahead and get themselves over the line. Like I say there, with relegation odds of 250 to 1, it would take a monumental collapse to see them relegated from this point. 14th on the Bookies table odds, we've got Swansea with relegation odds of 33 to 1. They were obviously on the receiving end of that beating against Bristol City over the weekend. The current state of play regarding Swansea is that they have 43 points on the board, so a 5-point buffer between themselves and the relegation zone, which is a reasonable gap at this stage, but 43 points won't be enough to keep you up this season, so they need to carry on plugging away. The interesting point about Swansea is looking at their remaining fixtures, they've got so many of their fellow relegation rivals to play between now and the end of the campaign. They've still got games to come against the likes of Sheffield Wednesday, QPR, Stoke, Rotherham, Huddersfield and Millwall. So while Swansea themselves are in a strong position to stay up at this point, they could have a decisive role in who does go down, depending on who they take points off between now and the end of the season. It does feel like these next few weeks for Swansea in particular are quite important, with 3 massive upcoming games against Cardiff, Sheffield Wednesday and QPR. Definitely a result or 2 needed in those games. In 15th place, the Bookies then have Watford with relegation odds of 28 to 1. What's interesting is Watford do have more points on the board at this stage than Swansea do, but they actually have shorter odds for relegation, which is quite interesting. Now, they obviously made the decision to sack Valérien Ismaël. Tom Cleverley has been instilled as that interim manager for the time being. A lot of outside noise regarding Watford and people thinking, oh, they've gone ahead and sacked another manager, but their form during the calendar year of 2024 had been absolutely woeful. Only Rotherham have picked up fewer points than Watford have during this calendar year. They've only won 2 of their last 14 matches, and you know, let's not make any mistakes about it. They were dropping down the Championship like a stone, and looking at their remaining fixtures from now until the end of the season, they just might have the toughest run-in of any of these sides. They've still got games to play against the likes of Leeds, West Brom, Preston, Ipswich, Southampton, Hull, Sunderland, Middlesbrough. All teams who are above them at the moment and will fancy their chances of getting the better of Watford. The board have obviously seen that and thought they'd needed to make a change. While a lot seems to be going against Watford at the moment, what they do have on their side is points on the board. They've got 45 points at the moment, so do have a 7-point gap between themselves and the relegation zone, which is a pretty healthy buffer at the moment. But based on those upcoming fixtures and the recent form, there was every chance, and there still is, that Watford will be dragged into this over these next few weeks. You'd like to think with 45 points on the board right now that they will have it in them to get a few results in those last 9 matches between now and the end of the season, but we've seen crazier things before. Let's not forget they're averaging less than a point per game based on the form from the start of 2024 up until now. In 16th place, the Bookies then have Millwall with relegation odds of 12 to 1. Millwall have significantly picked things up over these last few weeks, and since Neil Harris has come back to the den, I think those relegation fears have been significantly eased at the club. Under Joe Edwards, they were looking like a prime candidate for relegation, but they've now taken 10 points from the last 12 available. Another big win for them against a fellow relegation rival in Birmingham over the weekend as well. They put a 5-point gap between themselves and the bottom three, so still got a lot of work to do between now and the end of the season. But compared to just a few weeks ago, Millwall are looking a lot more comfortable than they once were. 17th in this table, it's Stoke with relegation odds of 15-2. Been a big few weeks for the Potters. It really felt like prior to that game against Middlesbrough, the club was in an absolute crisis. And had they lost that game against Borough, I do think there's every chance that the board would have twitched and maybe made a decision to sack Schumacher. Instead, they've stuck by him and they have reaped some of the benefits of that over these last couple of weeks. It was a massive result against Borough, and then last time out against Preston North End as well. I was obviously at Deepdale for that fixture, and while it certainly wasn't the prettiest games of football for the neutral to watch, that's what Stoke are going to have to do between now and the end of the campaign. Make every game a scrap and just fight for every point. And you know what? There was a bit of quality that was also on show from Stoke in that game as well. I think Schumacher realises now some of the players that he can probably rely on, and those key performers will be crucial in getting them over the line. My only concern with Stoke somewhat relates to the mentality within that group. I think they can be quite strong when they score first, but when the opposition scores first, that's when I have a bit of a problem with them. So far this season, Stoke have only turned around and won one game when they were the side to fall behind, and that's a massive weakness that teams can look to take advantage of. Obviously, in that game over the weekend against Preston, it was Stoke who scored first and they were able to hold on to all 3 points in the end. There's only a 3-point gap between themselves and the bottom three right now, and they've got some big matches to come, but yeah, compared to a couple of weeks ago, my thoughts on Stoke have been significantly boosted in terms of their survival chances, and the bookies would agree with that as well. Next up in the table, and in 18th place going off the bookies odds, it's Birmingham, currently with relegation odds of 9-2. Now, as of recording this video, Birmingham are sat just 1 point outside the relegation zone in 21st place at the moment, but crucially, they do have a game in hand on the teams around them. They play tonight against Middlesbrough. Depending on the outcome of that result, that really could swing things either in Birmingham's favour or properly leave them in it. They're now without a win in their last 4 matches. It was a real sinker for them last time, losing that one against Millwall, a fellow relegation rival, quite late on. Don't want to say too much about Blues because the result of tonight's game against Middlesbrough will have a significant impact on their survival chances. But after that game, they've got some crucial matches coming up against the likes of Watford, QPR and Preston, games in which they need to take advantage of. 19th on this table, it's Plymouth Argyle with relegation odds of 4-1. They are in a bit of a precarious situation at the moment, just 3 points above the relegation zone. Also, not having a great deal of form behind them as well. That game over the weekend against Blackburn, they really could have done with all 3 points. Instead, it ended all level. A few things away from the football pitch, also not particularly helping with Plymouth at the moment. Doesn't feel like that fan base has particularly taken to Ian Foster, and watching some of his post and pre-match interviews at times, doesn't feel like he's done a great job of trying to embrace and connect with that crowd either, and those sorts of things can be absolutely crucial, especially in a relegation battle when you need that home crowd cheering you on. Speaking of home form, that's been Plymouth's biggest asset so far this season. Away from home, they have been one of the worst sides in the league in terms of picking up results, but at home they've been a mid-table outfit. However, and quite crucially, and a reason why they find themselves in this situation, is their form at Home Park has tailed off quite significantly of late. They've only won 2 of their last 8 home matches, and when you can't bank on them picking up many results on the road either, suddenly it does leave them in a bit of a nervy situation. The next 3 home games I do think are quite winnable. They've got North End, who are looking badly out of sorts at the weekend. They've then got Bristol City and QPR as their next 3 games at home. If they get a reasonable amount of points from those games, that will ease their relegation fears. But I fear if they don't win at least 2 of them, things really could get quite tricky. Coming in 20th place on the bookies predictions, it's QPR with relegation odds of 9-4. Now, generally speaking, I think I'm pretty positive on QPR's survival chances right now. Yes, it wasn't the best of results over the weekend against Middlesbrough, but looking at their upcoming fixtures, I think there are some very winnable games on the horizon for QPR. There's a 1 point gap at the moment between themselves and the bottom three, but dare I say it, I think there's a decent chance for QPR to put a little bit of daylight between them and the sides below them if they can win some of their next matches. The next 5 games in particular, all being fairly winnable, up against Sunderland, Birmingham, Swansea, Sheffield Wednesday and Plymouth. Obviously playing a lot of the sides around them, and if they do have a slip in a few of them fixtures, that will put them right back in it. But generally speaking, they have been pretty steady since Cifuentes has come in. They've got the 4th best defensive record since Cifuentes was appointed in October. I do think there's enough winnable games in there for QPR to get themselves over the line this season, but as we've seen, in a league as unpredictable as the Championship, you really can't take anything for granted. This is where I do start to get really nervy though about some of these sides. In 21st place in the Bookies end of season predictions, they've got Blackburn with relegation odds of 2-1 right now. Of pretty much all of these sides, it is Blackburn who are in the worst form right now, obviously discounting Rotherham from that. They've only won 1 of their last 16 league matches. The club made that decision to part ways with John Dole Thomason, but since John Eustace has come in, there's not been an upturn in form whatsoever. There have been a few steady draws in there, but he's still yet to win a match, and the longer that continues, the closer Blackburn continue to drop towards the bottom 3. As things stand, Rovers do have a 3-point buffer between themselves and the drop zone, but it is worth flagging up just how difficult their fixtures are between now and the end of the season. They still have to play all of the top 3 sides, and it is difficult to see where that next win's going to come from right now. They've got the 2nd worst defensive record in the league, and if Smodics isn't producing a moment of magic, I'm not totally convinced by a lot of the other quality within that squad. Injuries haven't been kind to them, but you could make that argument for a lot of other sides in their situation. Given the form book, they are one of the sides I've got the most concern over at the moment. In 22nd place and in a relegation spot come the end of the season, according to the bookies, it's Huddersfield with relegation odds of 13-8. Now, Huddersfield are a bit of a tough call to make right now. I think there has been an obvious upturn in the majority of their performances lately. Against Cardiff, they weren't the best. First half against West Brom, I actually thought they looked really good, but things quickly got away from them in that second half. The difficulty with them is the lack of wins so far this season. Just 8 wins from 37 matches. Only Rotherham have won less than them this season. But what I do think goes in Huddersfield's favour is I do think they've got quite a few winnable games between now and the end of the campaign. They've still got games to come against the likes of Rotherham, Stoke, Millwall, Bristol City, Swansea and Birmingham. All matches especially where I think Huddersfield will fancy themselves to get a point or 3. So despite the fact they currently sit in the relegation zone and they're 1 point adrift of safety, I do think they've got more than enough winnable games to put their fate back into their own hands. What could go against them though is if they draw too many of those crucial matches when they really need to be looking to get all 3 points. 23rd place, the bookies then have Sheffield Wednesday, currently with relegation odds of 5-6. Now, out of all of these sides on this table, Sheffield Wednesday have been in the best form throughout the calendar year of 2024. What goes against them a little bit is the fact that they do have that ground to make up on the teams above them. They're only 1 point adrift of safety right now, but still with a few tricky games on the horizon. They obviously did fantastically well to win 4 games on the bounce, and then maybe a few Wednesday fans saw that recent game against Leeds as a bit of a free hit. The trouble with Wednesday is their next game is away at Ipswich, which is going to be really tough. Ipswich don't tend to drop many points at Portman Road, and if they lose back-to-back matches, suddenly they could leave themselves in a situation where they've got points to claw back again. They could be 4 points adrift of safety, let's say, if they lose that game against Ipswich. Sheffield Wednesday have constantly been in this mode of chasing the teams above them. They've never been able to get themselves out of the bottom 3, but you have a feeling they will carry on plugging away from now until the end of the season. The crucial games, especially from a Wednesday perspective, are those fixtures against Swansea, QPR, Stoke and Blackburn. If they win the majority of those games, whilst picking up the odd point here and there in their other matches, suddenly they give themselves a fighting chance. The problem that Wednesday have is they do have a smaller margin for error compared to the other sides above them because of the lack of points on the board at the moment. And that, of course, being a result of their dreadful start to the season under Xisco. Then the final side to touch on for today's video is Rotherham, and the bookies not actually offering relegation odds for them right now as they're such a nailed on team to be relegated. That at least courtesy of Sky Bet, who I have used their odds to formulate today's video. Even if Rotherham were to win all of their remaining 9 matches between now and the end of the season, they'd finish the campaign with 46 points, which definitely won't be enough to keep you up. I think Miller's fans have been resigned to the fact that they will be relegated for quite some time. It's 9 consecutive defeats on the bounce, 13 games without a win, and I mean, Rotherham are running the risk right now of becoming the worst team in Championship history. A title, ironically, that already belongs to a Rotherham side of the past. But there you guys have it. That will wrap it up for today's video. That is what the bookmakers are currently saying in terms of the relegation odds. Who do you fancy for survival at the moment? It really is up for debate, and I wouldn't be surprised if a number of different scenarios were to play out over these next few weeks. Do drop your thoughts in the comments down below, but apart from that, that will now wrap it up for today's video. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you all in the next one.